Hello horror hounds. Today we will be asking the question, why did it take me so long to watch Mario Bava's Black Sabbath? I watched it last night and I've fallen completely in love with this movie. I don't normally recommend formats or home video versions over others. I don't really tend to talk about that. This video will be as much an endorsement of the Arrow Videos release of this movie, which contains not only Black Sabbath, the AIP's American distribution version of this film, but also the original Italian version, Il Tre Volti della Paura, The Three Faces of Fear. That's the version I watched last night. This morning I've watched the extensive sort of supplementary material which explains the differences between the Italian version and the US version. We're going to be talking about the Italian version as a rule and mentioning differences with the US version. The Italian version is amazing, it's beautiful, it's eerie, it's dripping with style and visual flair, bordering on genius. Am I going too far? No, I really don't think I am. So yeah, last night I didn't watch Black Sabbath. I watched Il Tre Volti della Paura. I've got the little inside slip so I can't remember the Italian name off the top of my head. So The Three Faces of Fear, aka Black Sabbath. It's an anthology movie. There are 3 segments, so I'm going to be briefly discussing them in the order that they come in the Italian version, because one of the many changes AIP made to this movie was to actually change the running order of the story segments, which I think completely alters the flow of the movie. In the original, the stories build to a crescendo, really, in a similar way to when I reviewed Dead of Night, another superb anthology movie that it took me years and years to finally get round to seeing. There are reasons why the running order was changed for the US version. They put the strongest story first to really grab the kids. They saved the segment that starred Boris Karloff till the end to keep the kids in their seats, I guess, leaving the middle section completely redubbed and the story completely and utterly changed, foundering basically between these 2 segments, completely out of sorts, with the story and the subtext completely changed, to the detriment of that segment, which comes first in the original cut of the movie, and that first segment is called The Telephone, Il Telefono. I'm not going to do the Italian for each segment. The Telephone. Just before we get to the first segment though, a brief word about the intro to the movie. Not only does Karloff star in one of the segments, he also acts as the sort of narrator, the host, if you will, for the whole anthology. So the film starts with him in a suit addressing the camera. It was completely reshot for the US version. The US version has him as a sort of floaty head, if you will, in front of a black background, speaking to us like Vincent Price did for A House on Haunted Hill. The original intro that Bava shot is mental. Really, it's Boris Karloff, full body shot, slowly zooming into him as he beckons us in, standing in front of a swirly blue quasi-psychedelic background on top of a rocky outcrop that's magenta, that I guess was a little, AIP felt it was a little too bizarre for American audiences. As soon as I saw it, I instantly thought of Phantasm, and I thought, well, Don Coscarelli would approve of this intro. He wouldn't change it for a second. It reminded me of The Other Dimension in the Phantasm series. And as a little mental aside, it made me think we might do the Phantasm series on this channel, maybe in a run-up towards Ravager being released. But it made me think about how European the feel, especially the first Phantasm movie, is. But we're going off on an aside now. Karloff welcomes us, introduces us, tells us to be wary of vampires and spectres and the like. In a very similar way, it reminds me of the intro at the start of Dracula, the Universal's 1931 Dracula as well. A little address to the audience to tell them not to be too worried, but really with a wry nod to say, well, no, you're right to be worried, and now here we go. So that little digression aside, the telephone. Each of the three segments take place in a very specific and different time period, and this film kicks off in the modern day, well, 20th century now, and it's a tight little murder mystery story. Essentially, it's an early example of the giallo form, and regular viewers on this channel will know that I adore giallo. I adore Italian horror cinema, up, down, left, right, all across the board. So the very first treat for me, after seeing Boris Karloff on a magenta rock formation welcoming me to the film, is to see one of the earlier, if not earliest, example of giallo cinema. The idea was to get a story that sort of reflected the covers of the yellow, pulpy thriller and murder mystery and killer novels that the genre giallo, which is Italian for yellow, got its name from, because the covers of those books, those pulpy books, were yellow, with gaudy paintings on the cover to entice you to read the wares inside. And it's a tightly plotted little 30-minute murder mystery that it would be at home with something alongside something like an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents or something like that. I'm gonna, rather than getting into the plots of each of these, I'm going to give you an idea of the flavour of each of them, so as not to spoil it for you, because if you've not seen Black Sunday, I don't want to spoil anything for you. As an aside, if you want to avoid spoilers, I keep saying Black Sunday, that's his previous film, Black Sabbath. If you want to avoid spoilers for Black Sabbath, don't watch any of the trailers, especially the international trailer. Gives everything away. Just avoid it like the absolute plague. But yeah, the telephone is a very sparse setup. There are three characters in it, two main players. You could stage this, really. You could put this on a stage as a little one-act play, but there's a woman alone in her apartment receiving menacing phone calls, and she calls a friend to come and be with her, because she's worried that this third party, a man called Frank, is coming to kill her. And there you go, there's your setup. And if you know it's giallo infused, you know that there's going to be some twists and some reveals and some suspicions, and there'll be a revelation at the end. There you go, wonderful. The US distributors took the fact that they were able to dub it into English to completely change the plot, add a supernatural element that doesn't work in it, remove any reference to a previous relationship between the two female leads. And I don't know, if I'm being charitable, they probably felt that a straightforward murder mystery wouldn't fit with the other two stories that were supernatural. So they essentially created a supernatural element to the story and introduced it solely with the dub and new lines of dialogue and the like, and one insert shot, which is, instead of a hand holding a newspaper clipping, it's a hand holding a blank piece of paper that ghostly writing appears on, to sort of shore up the fact that it's a ghost story. It was never intended to be a ghost story. If you've only seen the AIP version of Black Sabbath, the American version of Black Sabbath, where the telephone segment in the middle of the film is about a ghost returning from the grave to exact revenge, I will say flat out now, you have not seen the telephone segment. Not how it was intended. It hobbles the entire story to try and cram it into something it's not. So watch the Italian version. The middle section is called the Wordelac. This is the one that stars Boris Karloff, and if you want the hint of a flavour of this one, it's like a fusion between a gothic hammer horror story, as if it was lit by Roger Corman making his Poe cycle of films, with source material that plays sort of like a Grimm's fairy tale. So if that interests you, if you're done with the giallo segment, now you're getting a sort of Roger Corman-esque hammer horror gothic Grimm's fairy tale, starring Boris Karloff. It's a vampire story that really does play out as though it's based on a genuine European folk tale, because these creatures, when they come back, they're not your traditional vampires. They feast on their family members. First of all, they're drawn to feast on the living family member that they loved the most and that loved them the most, and then they'll move down the chain in order of, descending affection. So it really is a family curse, a curse that comes back onto the family and breaks down the family unit. It's been cited as an inspiration for Night of the Living Dead, and you can certainly see that there. What you get with the Wordelac that George Romero couldn't give with Night of the Living Dead, because he had to do it on the cheap and had to do it in black and white. So what you get here is Bava's glorious colours. He's not bothered about realism at all. What he's presenting here is a hyper-realism. If it looks like anything, it actually looks like EC's horror comics. Lots of primary colours, splashes of green, mauves and purples all over the place, and gel lighting on characters' faces that shift and change to denote a change of what's going on the inside. There's a magnificent shot of just Karloff's face, and either the camera's getting closer, but ultimately Karloff's getting closer, and he just keeps the same expression, but he moves through different washes of light, and then it changes to red at the very end. And your relationship with the image you're watching changes as the lighting on it changes. This is the word. It's no surprise to learn that Bava was an artist and wanted to be an artist before he got into filmmaking. The way he paints with light here it's an absolute joy to behold. There's an element in the Wordelac segment which really reminds me of Toby Hooper's Danny Glick section of Salem's Lot. So you can tease threads of inspiration out from this that have seeded some really important films in the history of horror cinema. And what I'm pleased to announce is that the order that was originally intended means that after you've got this sort of gothic set in the 1800s tour de force with Boris Karloff in possibly his last great role. There's even a scene in it where he lifts up a small child and carries it off that just makes you your mind goes back to Frankenstein, with him as the great hulking creature lifting up the small frail child. All of these connections to be made whilst you're watching this sort of EC comic come to life through a hammer horror lens. He tops it in the third and final segment, called A Drop of Water. Now, if you've only seen the US version of Black Sabbath, you'll know that A Drop of Water is the section right at the start of the movie. And it means you start here and nothing quite reaches the height of this section. In the Italian version, you finish with it. You're building towards it. If you've seen the American version, you've seen a version of this with much more incidental music and musical stings put over it to tell the audience when to jump and what is scary, which is a tradition, unfortunately, that has not gone away. And in fact, it's developed in this day and age into your Conjurings and Insidious movies, where there'll be periods of silence and then big loud noises to make you jump, and blaring music to tell you when to be afraid. Whilst it's more or less shot for shot exactly the same as the Italian version, although in the US version there are a few, in a couple of scenes there's some extra dialogue added in just to bring the slow of thinking up to speed that isn't needed. In the Italian version, just like with the two segments that come before it, they all open with no music. They're very, I was going to say forgiving of their audience, but they all expect more of their audience in the Italian versions. No music, lots of scenes play out with showing people doing things with no music in the background at all, just the incidental sounds and the Foley effects. And it trusts the audience to come along with it. A drop of water in the Italian version uses background noise. The thunder of the storm going on in the background acts more as a score, because there's not really much of a score, is what I'm trying to get at. It's quieter, it's creepier. Bizarrely, the US version leaves out a sound effect at the very end. It includes a buzzing fly, which is in the original, but leaves out the dripping water effect, which is utterly bizarre to me, because just leaving out that sound effect of dripping water right at the end, believe me when I tell you, it completely and utterly changes the meaning of that segment and the ending of that segment. It's a bizarre choice. What you'll see here, though, is you will see a man painting with light now, probably like nothing else I've ever seen. The flavour of this segment, I would say, is Edgar Allen Poe. It feels like an Edgar Allen Poe type thing. It's set in the 1900s, with a nurse called out on a stormy night to an old homestead of a elderly, rich sort of recluse who has died, and she is to prepare the body for the funeral, and that's the setup. And it's got flavours of Poe, and I can't do justice in words to the way this segment uses light. You have to see it. You have to see it. I've not fully endorsed something like this for a long time, and I'm probably playing catch up with you guys. And you guys have all seen Black Sabbath, like, yeah, dude, we know. On Blu-ray, on an HD TV, it's creepy, it's scary, it's possibly the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. There's a ghastly death mask in it. I don't want to give away any more. It is actually leaving me speechless. It's beautiful. It's beautiful beyond words. The only area I'd say the US version improves on the Italian version is it retains all of Boris Karloff's intro segments. He has host segments at the start of the movie and at the start of each segment, which has to be dropped from the Italian version because they're played in a completely different order. What the Italian version has that the US version doesn't is the most gloriously bizarre epilogue host segment from Boris Karloff in his costume from the Verdelak segment, riding the horse as he's doing in one of the scenes in the Verdelak. And he's riding the horse, and the trees are whipping past him, and he pauses, he slows down the horse, whoa, 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 and then addresses the camera it, in a light-hearted, jokey fashion. And as the horse races on again, the camera pulls back, and you can see that you can see how it's backlit. It pulls back enough to show you that he's on a model horse on a spring, and someone's there behind him making the horse rock. And then there's the camera, and you've got about half a dozen men, each holding a sprig from a tree, running in circles around the camera and running the sprigs in front of the lens to make it look like he's riding through forests. And this light-hearted piano music starts playing as it's just the final release, the final shot of a drop of water segment is chilling, deathly chilling. And if it had ended on that cold, everyone would have left the cinema in absolute silence. He just lets the pressure valve off the whole project. As you can see, the camera pulls back and just reveals the movie magic, reveals all the workings behind this shot, and it just depressures you and sends you away with a smile on your face. My goodness. Black Sabbath, 10 out of 10. Sterling.